Welcome to the award-winning Superhuman Academy podcast, where we interview extraordinary people to give you the skills and strategies to overcome the impossible. And now, here's your host, Jonathan Levy.
Before we get started, I want to ask you, what would it mean for you to be able to double or even triple your memory and ability to learn? So many people tell us that this skill would be absolutely life-changing for them, but they just don't have the time. They just don't have the time. So that's why we have developed, my team and I, a 5-day memory mastery crash course where we go into all the fundamental neuroscience and the actual techniques that are used by the world's best memory athletes and world record holders. It's a course that we value at $97, but here's the thing. We are actually giving this course away completely for free. All you have to do to enroll in the course is visit jle.vi/5. That's jle.vi/5. Greetings, super friends, and welcome to this week's episode where we have a very special guest. We are joined by John Graham. John is the most recent U.S. memory champion, having won in 2018. He's also an international grandmaster of memory and the international coach for the entire Vietnamese memory team. He's appeared on TV shows in Russia, Indonesia, and the US, all showing his incredible trained memory. He is able to memorize over 181 names and faces in 15 minutes, memorize a 282-digit number in 5 minutes, memorize over 22 decks of cards in an hour, and many, many more things. In this episode, we talked not just about memory techniques, because we've done a lot of episodes about memory techniques, but I wanted to go deeper with John, and I wanted to understand how he actually uses this in his life, how he makes it into a better quality of life, more success, more happiness, more joy, more connection to other human beings. And I think we did a really good job covering, because a lot of times you might think, why do I need to memorize 181 names and faces in 15 minutes? It is about so much more than that. And John and I share the opinion that memory is the gateway to all learning, which is therefore the gateway to all self-improvement. We talk about that. We also talk about a methodology that he developed for learning how to perform well under pressure, whether that is appearing on stage, competing in athletic events, or anything else. I thought that was a really interesting takeaway, and I think you're going to enjoy the episode overall. So without any further ado, Grandmaster of Memory, Mr. John Graham. Mr. John Graham, welcome to the show, my friend. How are you?
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm doing great, and I'm excited to finally be on a show after listening to a ton of them myself.
Oh, that's awesome. I didn't know that you were a fan prior to setting up this interview, so I'm really touched and honored by that.
Yeah, I like getting into the minds of some of my fellow memory athletes, so it's helpful to learn some things from them.
Definitely. I love that approach. And I think there's no competition on the internet, only potential collaboration.
Right.
So, John, tell our audience a little bit about yourself and what you do. And then I really want to get into the why you do it.
Yeah. So I'm best known for being the 2018 USA memory champion. Fairly new to the memory scene. I did get started about 5 years ago, but it's been a slow ascent to the top. And I got started 4 years ago after reading the book Moonwalking with Einstein, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with. Just was really interested in the techniques. Didn't believe that you could improve your memory to a level like that, and just started trying these things myself. I was just more out of curiosity and enjoyment than anything else. And 5 years later, I've gone pretty far with it and learned a lot along the way.
Now, what made you passionate about it? I mean, did you have difficulty with memory before? Did you have an okay memory?
I had a pretty good memory for faces and information in school. I was a pretty good student, book smart. I think that was more of the fact that I wanted to do well. Anything that I'm doing currently, I want to do well at it. So when I was in high school, I wanted to get good grades. So I just tried and tried. I don't think that had anything to do with memory. The reason, it's kind of selfish why I wanted to do the techniques. I just wanted to see if I could do it. Just these amazing feats of memorizing a deck of cards and, show my friends that I had this cool little party trick, almost like a magic trick.
Mm-hmm.
So it was more of just, it wasn't that I was a bad student and I needed to improve my memory. It was more of just like, oh, this is a cool trick at the time. And I wanted to see if it was possible initially.
Wow. And so you didn't have any kind of superhuman memory going into it?
No. 4 years ago when I started, I knew nothing about memory techniques. I was bad at learning people's names. I was bad at learning languages, different things. So I was completely normal memory-wise. These techniques just took me to a new level.
That's so awesome. And what were you doing in life? I mean, where were you before you made this? Because I understand training for the memory games is pretty much a full-time job. So what were you doing before then?
So it's funny. The time that I took on memory techniques is the time my life sort of changed. At the time, I had just been let go from a job. It was my first salary job. I worked in the Denver Tech Center. I was working for a bankruptcy office. I hated the work. I eventually got let go because I really wasn't applying myself to it, and I wanted to be a business owner. So during this time, I had read Moonwalking with Einstein, started training with the techniques, got really inspired by them. And it was also at the same time my girlfriend, who's now my wife, and I decided we were going to travel the world. We were going to sell everything. We were going to take a year off from working. We were going to travel the world and live our lives, So I was training these techniques. We were planning a trip to travel around the world. And my life at that point completely changed. I never went back to salary positions. I never went back to a normal life, so to speak. These memory techniques at the time took me to my first competition. So we first started traveling to Southeast Asia, and I had heard that the World Memory Championship was going to be in China that year. So that was only a few months away at the time. I decided, let me keep practicing these techniques. I want to go to this competition. I want to meet some people, learn some more, just be fun, just live life. And that's what took me. What really changed my life was going to that first competition and what I learned there.
Wow. Tell me about that experience.
So here I am in China after a few months of practicing these memory techniques. I walked in, didn't know what I was doing. It's a massive competition. It's a 3-day sort of marathon. They have 10 events. Some of these events last an hour. So, for example, you have an hour to memorize as many numbers in order as you can, an hour to remember as many cards in order as you can. And these 10 events are spread over 3 days. And I remember the first day sitting down for the first event. I think it was names and faces. It had 15 minutes. And my heart was racing the entire time. I had never felt this way before in my entire life. I mean, I'm sitting down at a desk, looking at a piece of paper, and my heart is pounding. And it was kind of scary. I learned really quickly that memory techniques was more about being able to perform them in real world situations and under pressure than anything else. Because when I had trained for this competition, it was in the peace and quiet of my room, no distraction, no pressure. But in real life, you have pressure. You have meetings, you have presentations, you have podcasts that you have to perform for. You have to, give it your all. And my heart was just racing because I'd never felt this pressure before. I was at a competition, the world competition. I didn't know what I was doing. Those 3 days really whipped me. There were a couple points where I thought like I was going to quit. Some of the hour events, I literally wanted to just stand up and walk out the door because it felt overwhelming. It was just a lot. But the people I met there, the other competitors from other countries, even from the US, that was the first time I met Nelson Dellis, who's been on your podcast before. He's a 4-time USA memory champion and a friend of mine. But seeing how he performed, seeing how others performed really inspired me. I mean, Nelson, for example, I met him the morning before the competition. He had just arrived, just flown halfway around the world. He was jet lagged. And I think he ended up finishing in like 8th place in the world. And I was like, whoa, like if he can perform jet lag and get these scores, like that's amazing. I wanted to learn more. I wanted to get in their minds and be able to do that too. So that's kind of what kept me going after this competition.
Really incredible. Now, I'm not going to go too much into the techniques themselves because hopefully if people have been listening to this podcast for as long as I've been putting it out, they understand that you're using the same techniques as pretty much everyone else. I mean, everyone's using visual memory. Everyone's using memory palaces. I know there's some adaptations that allow people to win year over year. So I guess give us an update. Like, how far has this evolved since the last time I had Nelson on the show 6 or 12 months ago?
Right. It's evolved a lot in the last few years. People have really taken on amazing systems for learning numbers and cards, especially. And basically what that means is they have thousands of images already pre-made in their mind and practiced that represent these numbers or these cards, so that the instant they see the number of the card, they have a database to use an image for. And that's really the only advancement in the last few years. And not everyone does that, which is kind of amazing, because some of the world records, even in cards and everything, have been set using old like PAO systems. So people are always wondering what's the best way to be a world champion. And really, there's no good answer for that, because it's what you dedicate your time and energy to and what you choose to learn and be an expert in. So yeah, I use a similar system to Alex Mullen, who's the world memory champion. I have thousands of images for numbers and cards, and it's helped me. But Nelson, for example, he still has PAO systems that he's really, really good at and helps him win, national championships. So
yeah. And actually, Nelson was kind enough. I mean, talk about like a really generous guy. He was kind enough to just give us his PAO method. We offer it as a bonus in one of our courses. And you can learn from literally the best in the world. I think that's just so amazing about the whole memory competition field, is people actually want other people to beat them. It's not like, let me hide my trade secrets. Like Ben Pridmore, hey, I figured this amazing thing out. Everybody try and learn it so you can all beat me. So cool.
Yeah. And it's exactly that. We all know that it takes a lot of time and energy and practice to get this good. So we can give you all the information on how to get there, but you have to put in the work. And you're exactly right. Everyone wants everyone else to improve, so it pushes them farther. And that's sort of what inspired me to train to reach Nelson's level to win a USA Memory Championship. Is I remember reading his blogs and listening to some of his videos where he was early on in his career, he was looking for someone to push him. Every year he expected the U.S. competitors to be better, and they weren't. So he always called and tried to get people to train harder and harder. And so I don't know if he likes it that I'm here now and I'm at that top level, but that sort of inspired me, and I respect him for that.
Oh, well, last time I had him on the show, he was like, yeah, I'm focused on climbing. It was time to pass the torch. And I think he's very happy that now he can expand and do new things. I do want to ask you, because you said, you originally got into this for selfish reasons. I don't think those are selfish reasons. I think you got into them for self-ambitious reasons. But the big question, not everyone wants to compete. I'm the perfect example. I use these techniques in my everyday life. People always ask me, why don't you compete? It's because I really don't want to devote the time and practice it, if I'm completely honest. But how has this impacted your daily life? Because that's the part, where the rubber meets the road for me. How is your life different? And how are you different because you know these techniques and because you've refined this skill so incredibly well?
Yeah, the biggest thing for me has been my confidence level. Throughout high school and growing up, I was very introverted, extremely shy kid. I would tear up out of like almost fear when people approached me or intimidated me, or, I was just a really fragile kid, I would say. So just having something that I've mastered in a way, I don't feel like I've mastered it, but to reach this level and to be able to compete and be one of the top scorers in a competition or win a national championship or be on TV shows, has really improved my confidence. I know I can memorize something if I put my mind to it. I know how to do it. I know how to remember hundreds of people and their names and the information about them, which helps me with business and networking and just relating to people. So, yeah, a lot of memory techniques and competition skills aren't practical in the real world, but it's the confidence factor that's really helped me in my business, and just knowing that if I can reach this level in a competition, I can reach this level in business, I can reach this level with personal skills and talking to people. It's just really improved what I believe that I'm capable of.
Wow. There's so much good stuff in what you just said that I want to unpack it piece by piece. The first thing being, the confidence level of just achieving something. And it's not just that you achieve something and that you became a champion. It's also you were able to see, and I had this realization in my life at one point, and that's why I've devoted my life to teaching others and self-improvement. You realize like I can be X and then I can do something, like put in a little black box process, in this case, learning memory, and I can come out Y. And it's like, once you realize that your person is malleable, that you can become anything that you want, and that learning is the way, in this case, learning how to learn. But in general, learning is the way, like you can be anything or do anything that you want to do. And I think there's so much confidence that comes out of that, where it's like tomorrow you could discover in your business, like, hey, you know what? I'm really not so good at writing copy. This is a real example from my business. And you go, oh, wait a minute. I could just learn that, and I could spend a month and I could become a phenomenal copywriter. Right. And you just have that confidence to go into any situation. Another thing that stood out at me is, you didn't talk about memorizing tons of facts and figures and numbers and dates, which is super valuable, by the way, if you're in that line of work. But people always ask me, what do I use this stuff most for? And I think they're like shocked/disappointed when I say names and faces. Most powerful thing that I use, because everywhere I go, every restaurant I sit in, I memorize the hostess's name and all the waiters that come to the table. I just catch their name tag and I memorize it. And the other day I was giving a talk at Shell, and I was afraid. I tried some really risky stuff. I had them building a memory palace. I asked for volunteers to come on stage. So I took a lot of risks. So you know what I did? I went out in the front hallway and I just sat there because no one knew who I was. I kind of leaned against the doorway, and as people walked in, I memorized 50 people's names from their name tags. And then I stood on stage and I was like, I need 3 volunteers to come up on stage. And any other public speaker could have had a really awkward flop there, or people who weren't willing to participate. I just said, so I want you guys to know I've memorized most of your names as you walked in the room. So if you don't, come up, I'm going to pick on people. And then there was this awkward laughter silence, and I started listing off names. I was like, I'm not calling on you, but Fatima, Dan, Dawn, Michael, listing off the names, and people are just like, oh my God. So names and faces is so powerful.
So powerful, yeah.
In business, and Dale Carnegie, I always love to quote him. Remember that a person's name is the sweetest sound in any other language to that person.
Right. If you can reverse that, if someone isn't impressed that you can remember names and faces and they're like, oh, I don't need to learn that. Imagine if you have 2 people approaching you and you tell your name to both of those people. And then later on, only one of those 2 people remembers your name. Who are you going to like more? I mean, you're going to feel insulted because the other person forgot your name or didn't try to remember it, and the other person did. So if you can remember someone else's name and actively use it, that's so powerful. I mean, they're going to listen to you more. They're going to potentially like you more and want to do business with you or just chat with you, just give you a better service if you're at a restaurant. So yeah, absolutely. Names are just so powerful to use.
Totally. And they've got me in a lot of places where people have told me no. And I've been like, hey, is so-and-so still managing this place? Or, well, I wonder if maybe you called your manager. Wasn't his name James? James Cook. And they're like, oh boy. Okay. Yeah, no, I can go ahead and do that for you. And I drop that all the time, not in a mean way, but just in a I know what's up. I have everyone that works in this store's name memorized,
Yeah. I have a sort of a technique that I use to remember names, and it's a little bit different than what most memory people will teach. I mean, it's sort of similar, but I think it's very helpful. And so the basic technique is you hear someone's name, you come up with an image or an association for that name, and then you attach that image to something on their face. If they have a big nose, attach it to their big nose. If they have a, curly hair, attached to their curly hair. The problem is, what sort of image do you create for people's names? If you meet Mark, you can imagine a marker. Or if you meet, Abby, you can imagine a bee because it sounds like Abby. But what if you meet someone whose name you've never heard of before, or a name that's really long? Not every name sounds like something. So what I teach my students, I call it the ink blot test. It's sort of like the ink blot test where you've heard of the Rorschach test, where a psychologist holds up an image of an ink blot, a symmetrical shape, some weird form, and you have to instantly say, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you see this image? And it sort of helps them assess your personality and your thought pattern and everything. Well, I do the same thing when I meet someone. I don't try to come up with an image for their name. So let's say, for example, I meet Gabriella. Gabriella doesn't really rhyme with anything, doesn't really remind me of a picture of anything. So instead, I allow my mind to just populate something for me. I don't ask the question. A lot of beginners will sit there and they'll think, what does Gabriella remind me of? And they'll think and they'll search through their network of their mind and look for something, and they'll give up because they can't think of anything. Whereas I take the approach of listening and seeing what comes into my mind, sort of what populates right there. What's the first thing literally that comes to my mind? So with Gabriella might instantly make me think of a gymnast, like a famous gymnast that I saw on TV once at the Olympics, Gabriella. Or Gabriella might be that one girl that lived down the street from me when I was growing up. Or Gab makes me think of Gabby, like talking, gabbing. See, it doesn't make any sense to certain people, but to me, it makes perfect sense. It's what populated my mind. So I use those associations, those people that Gabriella reminds me of, to remember the Gabriella that I'm meeting. So when I meet a Gabriella and she has curly hair and I think gymnast, I imagine this girl is a gymnast and she's flipping around and her curly hair she has to put it up in a bun because otherwise it gets in her face when she's flipping around on the mat, something like that. And it's just sort of training my mind to listen for something instead of searching for something, searching for an association. Because I think that's where a lot of people get into trouble with memory techniques, is they try to come up with what's the perfect image for Gabriella when there isn't one. It's just everyone has different experiences in their life and different nostalgia. We've seen different TV shows, different interests, different books. So when you're using memory techniques, especially for names, you want to use what is unique to you. You want to use the connections, the strange, crazy connections that are in your mind.
I completely agree with you. And it's, it's so funny how you and I have had the same experiences teaching people, where people do get really hung up on, am I doing this right? And it's like, I always ask them, well, are you remembering this stuff? And they go, yeah. I go, great, then you're doing it right.
Right.
There are wrong ways to do a lot of things in this whole process. But as far as like coming up with the right visualization, there's actually no right or wrong way to do it, which I think is really, really cool. And I guess it's worth noting to people, if this stuff sounds quote unquote silly to you, like memorizing Gabriella and curls, John has actually used this exact technique to memorize 181 names in 15 minutes, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's true. That's what I did last year. And I expect to do a lot more this year. So yeah. And just to say, I was horrible at remembering names. I've always been good at recognizing faces, but I never ever could remember more than like one name at a time. And if that, it was lucky. So
wow.
This is trainable skill. Absolutely. And I hope everyone goes out there and actually just tries to do what I just said. Just use the first thing that comes to your mind. It takes some practice because our minds have sort of atrophied from listening like that. It's sort of something you have to train and just listen instead of search. It's just a little distinction there. But if you can listen to your mind, listen to the connections, Trust is a big thing. Trust what comes to your mind, even if it sounds ridiculous. Yeah, just using it. And like you said, there's no wrong way to do this. A lot of people get caught up in looking for that perfect technique or that perfect image. And it's a metaphor for life. If you're sitting there looking for the perfect way to do something, you're doing it wrong, because there is no perfect way. You just have to jump in. You just have to try. If it works, it works. If it doesn't work, try something else and just iterate from there. But if you're hung up, you're not going anywhere.
That's a really great takeaway as well. All right, at this point, I want to pause and take a moment to thank our sponsor, Four Sigmatic, who is making it easy for everyday people to unlock the incredible health benefits of mushrooms. I originally learned about Four Sigmatic when I met their founder at a conference in 2015, and I have been pretty much obsessed with their products ever since. Personally, I use their reishi mushroom tea most nights for an all-natural sleep aid. I carry their chaga immunity blend anytime I travel. And I've also pretty much switched out my usual coffee or yerba mate for their unbelievably awesome mushroom coffee, either in ground or in instant form. Now, what I love about the mushroom coffee is that it combines chaga for immune support with lion's mane for intense focus. And because of that, I actually find it to be more effective than most nootropics or stimulants, including Ritalin, despite having only 40 milligrams of caffeine. It's honestly insane. If you haven't tried out their products, I strongly recommend you do so. And to encourage you to give them a try, we've actually teamed up with Four Sigmatic to bring you an incredible 15% discount. To take advantage of that, just visit foursigmatic.com/superhuman today. All right, back to the show. I do want to ask, because you came into this a complete beginner, and in just a few years, you beat people who had a decade or more experience. So what else are you doing differently that allowed you to rise to the top so fast? Is it different techniques, different training?
That's a really good question. I don't know the true answer to that because I don't fully know what everyone else is doing. But if I had to use my best guess, it's a couple of things. It's me training smarter. So using my time and trying to push my boundaries all the time in my scores. I think a lot of people reach plateaus because they're okay with this score and they never try to progress any farther. So they go competition to competition, always having that general range and score because they maintain instead of accelerate their training. I do it consistently. So at least 15 minutes a day, I train every single day. Usually more. Lately, it's been an hour or so a day, more on the weekends because I'm training for the U.S. competition here shortly. But also other competitors, I notice they drop out or they give up or it's not a rewarding field. We don't get a lot of prize money. There's no real external motivation to train. So the people who are doing really well are motivated internally to improve, like myself, and others have kind of, moved on in their lives. They're doing something else that's keeping them busy, or they're okay just maintaining where they're at. So I think it's all three of those factors.
Really like that. I really like that. Now, you told me before we hit record that you have a different method for actually not just practicing the memory techniques, but practicing performing under fire. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah. So if you remember my first experience and how my heart was racing, I wanted to give up at my first competition. I just wasn't ready. And I talked with a fellow U.S. competitor named Brad Zupp. He was in China with me that first competition. And I talked to him personally about it. I said, I've never experienced this pressure before. Like, how do you train for that? Because my scores suck now because I was so nervous. And he said, yeah, it's normal. Usually it affects your scores, maybe 10%, 20%, some people, until you get used to it. And then you really never get used to that feeling. You're always nervous or have that internal dialogue, that voice in your head, doubting it. And so I asked him, I said, well, what do you do to train? And he says, well, sometimes I'll go to Starbucks and just train. And I said, without your ear blockers? And he kind of laughed and he said, yeah, it's harder to train when there's people talking around you or someone coming up to you. So yeah, I'll train with the noise. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. Like I never thought of it that way because I always thought I should train in the quiet, with my ear blockers on, just like I would in a competition. But you really need to train harder. You need to train for that stress. So fast forward, let's see, about a year, I applied to be on a TV show called Superhuman. And this TV show had Mike Tyson and a couple other cool judges, and all these people that were on the show were competing and showing off their unique mental and physical abilities. And I was there to, of course, show off my memory. Well, I had never been on TV before, and I thought back to that first competition and how it was a wreck. And I thought, if I was a wreck sitting there at a desk with ear blockers on, imagine what it's going to be like to be on TV with Mike Tyson as a judge. So I got really nervous, and I thought, how can I train? And I came up with what I call today chaos training. And in the military, they have a saying like, harder in the training, easier in the war, or something like that. What basically means...
It's funny that you say that. It's actually translated from Hebrew, where it sounds a lot better in Hebrew. I think that's probably the original. But yeah, Kasheba Imun Kalba Krav sounds really good in Hebrew.
It does sound better, yeah.
Anyway, carry on.
So it basically means if your experience in training is harder than it is in the actual battle, you'll do really well in the battle because it'll seem easy in a way. So I started just making my training chaotic. And what I would do initially I would memorize what I needed to memorize while standing up and jogging in place. And then that got easy. So I started like listening to music while I trained. That didn't really affect me. So I had to come up with different ways to stress my mind out, because the big problem is not just the heartbeat. The heartbeat it kind of fades away after a while once you get into the show or the competition, but it's the dialogue you have with the voice in your head and trying to figure out a way to battle that. So I started doing things like doing 20 push-ups really quick before I practiced while holding my breath. Then I would pop up, put on some earplugs and listen to like a podcast of two people talking about something I was interested in. So I was distracted by my heartbeat. I was out of breath. I was listening to two people talk about something I was interested in, and they were talking really loud. So I had to like cut through everything and focus on what I was memorizing. And what I found was it wasn't a lot of fun, practicing that way, but it really mimicked some of the experiences I have in competition or on TV. So it really helped me on that TV show, just cut through the noise of my mind, cut through the silence of the audience. I heard people behind me, because this was a tape show. I heard one guy yawn, and that really got into my head, but I was able to cut through that and just keep focusing. I felt like on the TV show, I felt like giving up, but it was sort of a faint whisper compared to what I experienced in my first competition. And I think it had a lot to do with experience of being in a competition before, but also the chaos training really helped. I really felt like the stress I had some days when I was training at home was more than I actually felt on the TV show. And I continue to use this technique today. I've been on TV in Russia, in Indonesia, and I use it to help me with that. But I also use it at certain events, certain competitions, like the U.S. competition coming up is a different animal from other competitions. You have to sort of be perfect at the end under all the stress and all the pressure and sitting in front of people. So I practice the same things, the chaos, when I'm training at home for the competition, making it harder so that the actual competition seems easier and more manageable.
Wow. That's a really cool thing. And I wonder what are the ways that could be applied in everyday life? I mean, what are high stress situations that people could apply this kind of stress testing of themselves to improve their performance under fire?
Yeah, I was thinking about that because I knew you might ask that question. And just being prepared, if you're in the gym and you're training, like lifting weights and stuff, I don't recommend it because that's dangerous. Don't stress yourself out in a way that's going to hurt yourself. This is more like chaos for the mind. If you're struggling with like performing or not performing, but giving presentations in front of people, which is a big fear of everyone, public speaking, I'm sure you could apply something like this to that, where you practice in front of a couple family members even. I mean, just getting used to that. Maybe do a couple push-ups before you jump in so you're out of breath and you have to like control your breathing and calm down and realize everything's okay because you're just practicing. I think it has application there. Just for any mental struggle that you're dealing with and things like that, it's really helpful to just kind of stress yourself out in a safe environment so that it's okay. I'm just trying to get better at this. And I think you will notice a difference.
Definitely. Now, I want to transition into some of the more rapid fire questions here and ask you, what's the number one thing you did to feel superhuman today?
Well, I feel superhuman just being on this podcast, to be honest.
That's a good answer.
No, I listened to this podcast, started listening a few years ago. I think Ron White was the first person I listened to. He's a fellow friend and memory athlete, 2-time champion in the U.S., and just like imagining that someday I would be on a podcast like this. And now here I am on this podcast. It's just amazing to think, if you think these things when you're like listening to podcasts or trying to achieve something, if you just think someday I could do that, eventually you can reach that. And just thinking back, that seems pretty superhuman to me.
Totally. That's the best answer I've ever gotten for that question. I love it. I really love it. Tell me a little bit about your superhuman routine. Obviously, you're at least mentally performing at a very high level. I have a feeling that you're also taking pretty good care of yourself in other ways. What are some of the things that you do to make you perform at your best?
A lot of the simple, boring things like getting enough sleep is hugely important. Eating well. I avoid eating grains and processed foods and sugars and dairy, and eating cleaner, balanced meals, like just eating rice and sweet potatoes for my carbs and eating a clean protein and vegetables for a meal, just something simple. It really keeps me focused and sharp. I eat a lot of avocados and healthy, high-fat foods like grass-fed butter, coconut oil. It keeps me sharp, I think. But, for me, the biggest thing is just consistency. If you take away all the health stuff, when I train, I apply myself every single time, every single day. I give myself at least 15 minutes. I have to do it at least 15 minutes because who can't do 15 minutes of something every day if they want to improve? Every single day, I try to push my boundary and to get uncomfortable, to make mistakes when I'm training, to write down notes on what I'm going to do next time to test myself, or what kind of chaos I should do because I'm feeling like this isn't helping me be stressed out when I train. Just every day I'm thinking about what can I do, and then just putting in the work, just training every single day and what I love and trying to improve every single day.
Really cool. Really, really cool. And by the way, you are teaching and performing memory full-time now. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm also the coach for the Vietnamese memory team, which is sort of a new thing for me. But they're on the rise. They want to have a say. They want to have a presence in the world as far as the memory athletes go. So they hired me to come on and train them. So I'm having a lot of fun. And I went to Vietnam a couple months ago, and I'm going back. I'm actually learning Vietnamese because of this, and I'm actually applying these memory skills practically to learn a language. So that's been a lot of fun too.
That is really cool. And I imagine that they're all watching very carefully to see how much vocab you pick up, right? Because you're the teacher, you're the coach.
Yeah, they are. That's sort of a motivation to keep learning, because I want to impress them.
I bet. Now, a few more rapid fire questions here. What's one product or service you simply couldn't live without?
It's an easy one for me as a memory athlete. It's a website called Memory League. It's just quick digital memorization of all the event. Well, there's 5 events, but names, cards, numbers. The reason it's so valuable is, back in the old days, back in the old days, a few years ago, before all this digital training, if you wanted to train numbers, you had to print off a sheet of numbers. And then you'd have to write down the numbers on a piece of paper that you remembered. Or if with deck of cards, you had to buy a deck of cards, you had to shuffle them up every single time. You had to memorize the cards. And then you had to use a separate second deck to put that deck in the same order as the first deck. So being able to memorize almost instantly, having things populate on a screen for you and being able to digitally answer and see if you're correct, within seconds is huge for repetition and just improving quickly. There's not a lot of time wasted with like analog training like back in the day.
Wow. This is really cool and really funny because I'm looking at the overall leaderboard and you are number 2, first off, in the world after Alex Mullen, the new world champion. But also Boris Conrad is number 12. And I actually just interviewed Boris this morning. He's a neuroscientific researcher.
Oh, awesome.
Also. Yeah. So really, really cool. Like I feel my whole day has been building up to this, working my way up the list. So that's really, really awesome. And people should definitely check that out because it totally saves a ton of time with study and review.
Cool. I'm excited to listen to Boris's interview. He's a friend of mine, and I was on a TV show in Russia with him, and then also just meeting him in competitions. He's a really good friend of mine, so I'm excited to listen to that.
Really, really cool. We focused a lot more on the neuroscience of how all this stuff works.
Right. He's an actual scientist, and he's a lot smarter than me, so listen to him.
And me. Now, let's see. What else do we have here? Homework. What can we give people for homework to do before next week's episode?
Yeah. Learn some names, people. Go out there. When you meet someone new, listen to their name and just try to see what comes to your mind. Just any weird association, any weird TV show character you've seen, any book you've read, any thought that pops in your mind. What does their name rhyme with? What does it sound like? Just try to think of an association. Remember someone's name, attach that association to them, the way they look or the feature on their face or the vibe that they're giving off. Just make a connection, tell yourself a story about them to remember their name, and really take that to the next level and just try it every single day. See how powerful this actually is. You're going to be able to remember dozens of people's names in a day, hundreds if you really wanted to, if you keep trying this and seeing how that affects your life when you use people's names and remember them and see the joy that it brings them and the influence that it gives you with other people.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Now, John, I do want to give you an opportunity to let people know where they can learn more about you, where they can check out some of the stuff that you're doing, maybe watch some of these TV shows and check out all the content that you're putting out.
Yeah, I appreciate that. My website is probably the best place. You can actually contact me there. My email's on there. My website is memoryjohn.com and John with an H. So memoryjohn.com. I have a link there to see all the TV shows I've done. If you want to see my show with Mike Tyson or the show in Russia where I memorized 20 fitness models, their names and everything. And that was a lot of fun. Or if you want to contact me, if you have a question, what I do every Friday on my email list is I answer a question that a reader sends in. So I always give memory tips. And the best way to sign up for that email list, that free email list, is to just go to the homepage of my website. There's a sign up where you enter your name and email, and you get a free video on how to remember names. And you put you on my email list and gives you some memory tips every week to take away. And if you want to contact me, use the contact page and send me an email. I'd love to hear from you and see what questions you have for me.
Amazing. Amazing. John, I do want to thank you. But first, before I let you go, I want to ask if people take away one message from having heard from you today and they carry it with them for the rest of their lives, what would you hope for that to be?
Wow. I've given the names tip, and that's powerful. The biggest thing that's helped me with memory, with learning names, with learning Vietnamese, with my business, it all boils down to one thing, and it's consistency. If you want to be good at something, or if you want to achieve something, have success in anything, you have to do it consistently. And a lot of people get overwhelmed. they see how far they have to go and they sort of quit or they like give up because, oh, that's too much work. Where's the shortcut? Where's the shortcut? Well, there is no shortcut. Let me just give it to you straight right now. There's no shortcut. You can hire an expert and a coach to help you learn faster. That may be the shortcut, but really you have to put in at least 15 minutes a day to something. You have to dedicate it. Block out a time, make it a habit every single day, build on that. Do more if you can, but at least something every single day. And do that for months, which builds into years. And pretty soon you'll be amazed at the progress you have, and you'll reach success if you do that.
Amazing. John Graham, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm glad we finally got you on this side of the speakers. It's been an absolute blast.
Yeah, I'm so happy I was on here. Thanks, Jonathan.
My pleasure. Let's talk soon.
Yep. See ya.
All right, super friends, that is all we have for you today. But I hope you guys really enjoyed the show, and I hope you learned a ton of actionable information, tips, advice that will help you go out there and overcome the impossible. If you've enjoyed the show, please take a moment to leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher, or drop us a quick little note on the Twitter machine at GoSuperhuman. Also, if you have any ideas for anyone out there who you would love to see on the show, we always love to hear your recommendations. You can submit on our website, or you can just drop us an email and let us know. That's all for today, guys. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in to the award-winning Superhuman Academy podcast. For more great skills and strategies, or for links to any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit superhuman.blog. While you're at it, please take a moment to share this episode with a friend and leave us a review on iTunes. We'll see you next week.